I'd like to thank you for joining us this morning to hear artist Lisa Yuskavage speak about her work on the occasion of her profound exhibition, The Brood, which opened here last night at CAM. Lisa and I will speak in conversation for approximately 45 minutes, and then we'll open the floor up to questions from the audience. So please remember to turn off your ringers if you haven't already on your cell phones. Thank you. Lisa, turn off the cell phone.
Okay, it's off.
The Brood traveled to CAM from the Rose Art Museum at Brandeis University, where it was curated by Christopher Bedford, the institution's Henry and Lois Foster director. I'd first like to thank Christopher for originating this incredible exhibition, and to Lisa for allowing me to think through how this exhibition could be modified for CAM, which included the addition of 3 paintings, Mardi Gras Honeymoon, the tremendous diptych titled Bonfire on loan from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and an amazing new painting titled The Big Pileup, which Lisa made specifically for our exhibition. I'd also like to thank Hannah Schoenk and David Zwerner from David Zwerner Gallery, who were our partners in this second iteration. As an exhibition, The Brood is conceived around 3 compositional formats: diptychs, triptychs, and what Lisa calls symbiotic portraits. That is to say, a single panel painting that features multiple figures. Born in Philadelphia, Yuskavage received her BFA from Temple University in 1984 and her MFA from the Yale University School of Art in 1986. Her work has been the subject of numerous solo exhibitions across the globe and is included in major museum collections, including the Art Institute of Chicago, the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden in Washington, D.C., the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, SF MoMA, the Walker Art Center, the Met, the Modern, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. You've hit them all. This morning, we'll chart Lisa's artistic development from her emergence in the early 1990s to the present, discussing many themes embedded in Lisa's work, including female transgression and empowerment, the dialectic between misogyny and feminism, notions of American impropriety, the role of color as subject, and the female body as a site of defiance and decadence. To my mind, The Brood positions Yuskavage as one of the most significant painters of her generation, undoubtedly one of the most foundational artists in understanding our American cultural imaginary, and presents a cogent argument for figuration's importance, promise, and renewed agency. Please join me in welcoming Lisa Yuskavage.
I already took a selfie with you guys in it, so I promised myself I would start doing that. So thank you all for coming. It's really nice to see how warm and enthusiastic and interested St. Louis is, the art lovers, and just the curious. Anyway, hopefully we will not disappoint you. Jeffrey's got some great questions, so we should get started.
Great. I thought we'd start at the beginning with the babies. So this is the earliest body of work in the show. It began in the 1990s and was really completed in 91, 92. And one of the most important aspects of this painting for me is the level of vulnerability in each of the subjects. The female subject appears to be in conversation with the background. Subject and foreground become one and the same. And in that way, it echoes the emergence of your work on the scene with the emergence of these women in the paintings, almost as if the subject and the painting themselves cohere. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how these paintings came to the fore, the context by which you made them, and why they exist for you.
I mean, I think it was not, being a figurative painter in, especially someone who would be, taken seriously by adding something to the conversation at the time in the early 90s was kind of an uphill battle for, myself and, a few other people like John Curran. I mean, there were a couple of people who, just happened to have gone to school with, and we all sort of found that the idea of always doing first and most importantly what was of interest to us and what we really wanted to, the stories we wanted to tell and the ways we wanted to tell them. But also, it was always very interesting to sort of go against the authority and not give necessarily what was wanted, but to sort of try to break through. So these paintings were painted in some ways as a response also to, is that Brighter?
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of funny. These are just footnotes because the actual paintings are over there. The museum's gone to a lot of trouble and expense and care to get them here, so please go look at them actually. But the paintings came out of a very long period of frustration where I felt that I had left something of myself behind. I had studied art in a very serious way and felt that, I call it painting with your pinky up, that there was like high art and there were certain types of playful and dark things that I would talk about in my day-to-day existence and really care about in my day-to-day existence or be interested in fiction or in film, for example, Fassbinder or things that I was looking at. But I didn't think that they belonged in art. And then at a certain point, a number of things came together. Some were, and I actually think that most of the time, and it's maybe frustrating for some people to hear this, things are just like kind of magically appear. And like a postcard of a seal from a Save the Seals campaign appeared in my mailbox. That and a bunch of bills, It was like always searching for that letter when you're 21 years old that says, you just won this grant that you didn't even apply for. I was always looking for that letter. But at any rate, this thing came and it was like this very sad seal looking up at me that's saying, obviously the point of this is don't club me. And I thought, I think that's sort of how paintings feel, when you put them out there, like, please don't be mean to me. I had gone to Yale, so the paintings were places where people, points of attack. And, I always wanted to protect my babies. And there was really not, so I had to really think through all of that. And I thought, what would happen if I just stuck these two sad eyes on the canvas, knowing that, so I had a blank canvas, and I knew it was a really bad idea, which kind of turned me on, like, this is good. Because basically, when you're at the point, and this is sort of a shout out to the, young artists that feel like nothing is going to, there'll be no traction, it's a great opportunity to do whatever the hell you want. Like, you really have to stop behaving. This is when you have to misbehave. Because nobody's there to see you behave, so you might as well just let go. So I decided it was a bad idea, put two eyeballs on the canvas, and then the painting, I had a series of paintings, which were those paintings, staring at me. And then I was like, they're watching me. Now what? And then I decided to sort of be mean to them. And then sort of had this dialogue, and it was for the first time an extremely fun dynamic as opposed to making paintings that, following a process that seemed very formulaic that had already been handed down to me. It's also, I told the story yesterday, so some of you heard it. I had also been making rather well-behaved paintings prior to that. Things that, I call them trying to please the very unpleasable people, no matter what you do. Some of you might know that experience. No matter what painting you make, it'll just never be, it'll never find, the love that you're putting into it. So my reaction to that is to, it's like that new, there's like a new television series where the guy says, this is called Billionaire, and the guy says, what's the point of fuck you money if you can't say fuck you? So it's like the painting saying just, fighting back. Mm-hmm. And I just had come out of this period where I was making these very well-behaved paintings. I stopped painting for a year, and even though I had just created this enormous amount of debt, and I had had an exhibition with these paintings, and I felt really trapped by what I had wrought, I was about to apply to graduate school for film. My parents are here. You probably don't even know that. I probably didn't bother to tell you I was thinking about applying to graduate school for film. Then I thought, then I'd have to start this whole education thing. That was like, I didn't want to go back to school. That was the thing. I thought maybe I could just make film, because I thought I needed a medium by which I didn't feel burdened. And I thought there was something about the fact that I was, being so obedient. And I thought, so then a little anecdote happened, and these are very important things that happen in your life, these anecdotes. From graduate school, somebody called. We were living in this tiny little, cold water flat with a bathroom in the kitchen on Ludlow Street in Manhattan. And we got this phone call, and somebody leaves a message and says, come to this party. And then 20 minutes later calls and says, well, Matt Vey, that's my husband, you can come, but Lisa's just too much. Like, nobody really wants her to come to the party. And we were both like, who gets disinvited to a party? That's kind of awesome. Right. It's like, well, what did I do? Right. Anyway, my husband very cleverly said, you're having all this trouble with painting, but what would happen if you made paintings that got disinvited to the party? And you became demure, like these paintings that you feel are suffocating you. Why don't you suffocate this a little more and get that into the work? And I thought that was a really interesting idea. So I, masticated that in my kind of imagination for a while. What would it look like if I changed? What would that painting look like? What would that be like? What is that energy that was getting that stay out? So the paintings weren't even being invited to a party, so I was just like, I might as well just, flip it off, So I was just so I started this work, and it was for the first time I really truly felt like I could breathe as an artist, really take breath. And people, when I made these paintings, this is Arcangelo, who is the artist in this other gallery, asked me at dinner the other night, what was it like, what did people think, and what was it like? And I said, most people didn't like them. Right. Except good artists liked them. And I noticed that. And, people were not buying them, and that was fine with me. It was for the first time, in some way, I knew I was onto something, because no matter how many ways people said, this sucks, or this is wrong, or this is not correct for a woman to be doing, this is not correct for, I said, this feels this right, it's worth working for. I was working several jobs. This young lady in the front row was in my watercolor class at NYU, and I wasn't teaching it because I wanted to. I needed the money. So I was like, but I was like, I was willing to do all these things only if what was in my studio had import to me. Otherwise, I was going to just quit it.
And there seems to be something about these works about color. There was something very wrong about the color. For some reason, it felt very American to me. They felt very synthetic, unnatural. These figures weren't coming from something pastel or beautiful at this time. And color has been a motif that really is a key to understanding all of your painting from the 1990s to the present. How would you describe the color in this work? How did it come to you?
Well, in this body of work, I was just interested in, basically the images in the Bad Baby paintings, those 4 Bad Baby paintings, are personifications of the paintings themselves. I thought if a painting, I thought paintings and pubescent kids, like where things are popping out and they don't, like they can't hide, but they want to hide, but then they want to like kind of control, but they can't control. So I thought it must be what a painting feels like. And I was really interested in this idea of having painting be alive. And then I was thinking further that like color could be an extremely potent expression of that. I was always interested in something potent. So the idea sfumato, that is, an Italian Renaissance idea of smoky, blending, the edges blend, disappear. Color is close, value is close. Supposedly takes place at dusk where light is low. I sort of thought, well, what if I just sort of turn that on its head and I went to the art supply store and thought of the color as almost in the same way sculptors or some sculptors think of their material like fat or felt, and that it actually has meaning. So finding pigments that had not existed prior to the 20th century because of manufacturing, where I grew up in this place where they actually had a place called Roman Haus that manufactured pigments. And I was always interested in this idea that like there was this place that was manufacturing synthetic pigments. And the history of pigment is a really interesting idea. So, because it actually provided for artists at different times possibilities that were not there at other times. So I thought, make it about the moment we're in now, and this kind of hot, hot, hot pink. It's a dye. Dyes did not exist for Leonardo. Not that color.
That's a very good segue to talk about one of my favorite triptychs in the exhibition, Redhead, Blonde, and Brunette. How does color play in this triptych?
I call this Blonde, Brunette, and Redhead because that's how you say it.
All right.
Like a blonde, brunette, and Redhead, even though the redhead's on the left. Technically, that's how it's titled, but how does color play itself out here?
Yeah, I mean, you've told me a great story once about how one of the biggest no-nos in painting is to make a painting with red, yellow, and blue.
Well, I don't know if it's a no-no. It's just not that simple. Like I was teaching color, and I was talking about how the primary color triad, red, yellow, and blue, need to be modified because they have nothing in common. That's the point of the primaries. They are very different. And in order to make a painting work, you have to find ways to create, it's a combination of harmony and contrast. So to create harmony, you have to manipulate things quite a bit. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about the fact that, almost every painting that, I actually liked that was in the world was sort of based on a complementary palette, which meant that two of the primaries had been manipulated, and then you had already a dynamic and a relationship. And I thought, what would happen if you could find a way to work with red, yellow, and blue? And I just happened to also, my mail is a source of great pleasure because I go to the next thing. So I happened to get this Laura Ashley catalog. This is a pull in the mail. I ask and it shows up in my mailbox. Now that the mail is like now it's like in my inbox, it's like so Laura Ashley was still in business, or kind of right at the end of being in business, and I just so happened to be also teaching at Princeton, so there's a Laura Ashley store, and I walked in and said, looked around. I was kind of curious because I noticed in the Laura Ashley catalog there was this way in which every color was modified in a way that, like, sort of the copy was, Laura has made it possible for you to mix, the color, any color, with any other color. And I was like, that's interesting. How's that possible? You sort of try to take, like, teaching color and then this idea of buying all the Laura Ashley possible, you can do plaids and stripes and pattern, it looks rather frilly in the end, but it does go together. And I was thinking, okay, so obviously she's turning them into sort of pastels to some degree, but she's also modifying them to some other way. So I went into the store and I found a Laura Ashley color theory book. Could not believe it. And bought it, very good, read it, And it's,
Eat your heart out, Marcia Hall.
yeah, and then many years later when I found another book by Marcia Hall, who is one of the living great writers, thinkers on Renaissance color.
Right.
Happened to be teaching at my undergraduate school, but I didn't take her class because I heard it was hard. You know, what are you going to do? She later wrote for a book catalog for the ICA. I was like, oh, Marcia, I'm a big fan. I didn't take your class, though. I was afraid. But anyway, so the book that she wrote talks about color in a strange way, using different language, almost identically to Laura Ashley. So it was a very interesting thing to me, this balance. I think what you're trying to get at is between the high and the low.
Exactly.
And so in order to make Blonde, Brunette, and Redhead, I went back to my studio after, you know, perusing these things, and I had some empty paint tubes. I had this idea, like, what if I made, rather than accepting paint, I started to mix paint so that they, quote, went together in advance. Like, I created my own palette of primaries, my own personal primaries. And so I got this, you know, worked it and tubed it and made a range of it, and then the idea of red, and then it becomes, what are you going to paint? And the way my mind worked is that, you know, red, yellow, blue became a blonde, a brunette, and a redhead. And the fact that they were 3 feet square, there were 3 of them, and that one was a sphere, one was a pyramid, and the other one was a cylinder, it all just sort of fell into place, this kind of magic of form. Like, the formal attaches itself very, like, things don't really, like, a painting won't get out of my studio really unless, like, something kind of playful or kind of what we call low kind of idea that kind of gets transformed through a very formal, very really an art idea, you know? And so this is sort of like, you know, the blonde, brunette, and redhead is like kind of a dopey idea, but you get sort of like machinate it through this other system.
This painting, this triptych really, not only is color, not only are these subjects personified by color, but color was the subject. That in some way they have their own kind of presence. You know, they become part of your brood, so to speak.
And I've seen people, like, because, you know, I sometimes troll the internet, you know, by mistake. And I've seen people dress up as the blonde for Halloween. And, you know, it's just funny, you know, like doing this, like putting tape on their lips, trying to get their lips to do that. It's actually really great. And their eyes kind of like...
But they're also quite psychological. And I think that's a good place to go to the next diptych, which I think is, you know, when we were talking about how this exhibition was received at the Rose, you know, I had said, well, one of the paintings that caused the most problems for people was the Rorschach blot, the yellow painting on my right. And, you know, you so astutely said, well, why is that a problem? Why is a problem a problem? What is it about this painting that challenges how we understand or receive a female body? Is it because the body feels plastic? Is it this gaping mouth? And, you know, you seem to make paintings that are incredibly psychological and really take us to that psychological place. So maybe you could speak a little bit about what these paintings are about and how they perhaps say more about the viewer than the works themselves.
Just for those of you who may not know, transference is, you know, a Freudian idea that, you know, it's actually still rather modern, even though it's outdated according to shrinks, you know, like, but it still exists. The idea that there is no such thing as, when you look at, you have a relationship with another person, or I would say an artwork or a film or anything, one person can have one experience of it, and another person has a totally other experience of it. And it's not just liking or not liking. If we just say, like, 2 people who love something, an artwork, they have very different experiences of that artwork. And I was very interested in how much my own work was having so many people projecting so much onto the work and not realizing what they were really doing, because I would be in openings and people wouldn't know it was me, and they'd say, she better be gay. And I was like, that, it's a funny comment, but, and I was like, what, you have to be? That's a very strange thing to say about the ownership of who gets to do X, Y, Z in an artwork. And I just thought it was a really interesting projection by that person. And I thought that the loss on the view of that, on the viewer who said that, or, whatever they might say, even if it's positive, is that they don't sit with the reality that what they're projecting is a lot about their own self and what they can or cannot bring to something. I myself am a viewer of my own art and other art, and I'm always aware that what I see, like the log in Arcangelo's piece, when it started to get smashed, I thought it looked like it was wetting itself, like out of fear, because, it's like that, that's in my mind, like I wouldn't, if that were me and I was put under that kind of pressure, it seemed very psychological, the log peed its pants, and I recognize that that's my projection. And I'm, and I would hope that artist would find that interesting, and then maybe find that to be something they could take somewhere else. So I was thinking about those ideas that to make a painting as a throwdown to painting is a screen onto which you project. And so because I was also working in an analytic relationship and did have a projection that somebody was wearing Laura Ashley pajamas, which came before the Laura Ashley catalog, which is probably why I picked up the Laura Ashley catalog. I was like, kind of like, what does it mean? Like the goody two-shoes. And I realized, like, that's so much about, I want to be a goody two-shoes. I want to be this, perfect, person. And that was so much, I knew that was some idea of myself that I was projecting onto this blank screen of another person, the therapist. So I just decided really honestly to just describe it, like the transference portrait of my shrink in her starch nightgown, which obviously doesn't exist, with my face and her hair. So I was like really painting an actual transference. Rorschach blots are in psychoanalysis a form of actually getting people over history. It's the same, whatever, 8 or 10, whatever, ink blots. And they've been used traditionally. What do you see when you look at this blot? What do you see when you look at this blot? So I was really just asking the images to ask that question of our culture, and I think it's kind of like gotten a little lost. But I think that was important to me to start to make that work.
And the subject of the Rorschach block, was there a model? Was it completely invented? I mean, for me, it formally takes on a blow-up doll possibility. Was that something you were thinking about, or was it completely?
Have you ever seen a blow-up doll that looks like that? It wouldn't sell.
Amazing.
The round mouth sort of is the, clincher for that. And, when I put the round mouth in, I was like, looks like a blow-up doll. Do you want to go there, Yuskavage, or you want to steer away? I could have very easily changed it, but I really liked that provocation to myself. I'm the first person I'm provoking. And she was, so vulnerable. But I liked that her vagina and her anus formed an exclamation point. It was like, ta-da! It's not really a vagina and an anus, it's an exclamation point if you look at it, and she's super vulnerable and she's not sexy. A blow-up doll is supposed to be sexy, I'm sure anybody could, somebody might find it sexy, but it's like, It's just super vulnerable.
But there was a plastic quality, on the one on the left, it was more of an autobiography in a way, and the one on the right had a sense of plasticity.
Yeah.
I think, so that contradiction.
Yeah, and it just, that painting has always been difficult for people, and I actually have had a lot of responses myself to that difficulty. I remember the first time I didn't have a gallery, and somebody got some really nice gallerist to come into my studio to try to get them to show me, and he walked in. This was the only painting on the wall, and he didn't take his coat off, or he didn't take his hands out of his pockets. That happened a lot. People were like, I'm gonna not touch anything in here.
Right.
Like I might catch whatever's going on in here. Like, and he said, you know what I show, don't you? And I was like, can we just be friends? It's okay. So I kind of knew it was like, not for most people.
Right.
And I still thought, it doesn't matter. It's important to sometimes say something that's uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Speaking of that, I thought it would be really interesting for the audience to see a slide of an artist who you speak about quite a bit as someone who was a touchstone for you in your own work before we get back into the more recent work. And so I thought we'd talk about Guston.
Why does his slide come up good and mine's don't? So Philip Guston, who doesn't like Guston at this point? But when Guston was making these paintings, he was a big flop. That's a famous story, got horrible reviews, nobody bought them. And randomly I found out a fact, I don't know if it's true anymore, but at least 10 years ago when I heard this fact that his middle period paintings were abstract, at secondary were still like way more expensive than these. Like people are afraid of these paintings. Mm-hmm. And I thought, awesome. Mm-hmm. How great is that? Because money does not create actual value to me. It buys you stuff, but it doesn't make it important. These are the most important paintings that were made in America, I think, ever.
I would agree. And that's the kind of level of fear and courage and autobiography that I think we've talked about.
So what we have here it's like, first of all, and then the other thing is, the first time I saw these paintings, I really didn't like them at all. That was a Whitney. I got on a bus. I was at Tyler, and there was graduate students, and I was friendly with them, and they're like, "We're going to New York to see the Philip Guston show." I just was like, "Can I get on the bus? I'll cut school and go to New York." It's like, "When are you coming back?" 7:00. Okay, cool. I get on the bus. I have no idea what I'm looking at. I was just basically following the older kids, And then I get off the bus. I see this. I'm like, "Ugh, this is awful." But I thought about it and thought about it and thought about it, and then it just didn't leave my head. And then I went to the library and I started reading about it, and I became madly head over heels in love with it, because I began to understand that Philip Guston, who was born Philip Goldstein, who had always been a successful artist. As a young artist, he was a WPA artist, did very well. It was like he was always embraced. And then, in order to move forward with his work, he had to often lose his audience and disappoint people. So he disappointed his first round of supporters. He had won the Carnegie Prize for they weren't quite WPA paintings, but they were we would not care about Guston if he had stayed there. Then he moved on to be a lyrical abstract painter, wonderful painter, where the language of the paintings that are here were kind of starting, but that wasn't enough for him. But he was he would have been considered a second tier artist if he had stayed there. He then, went into kind of a, hiding and started to make work that was super important to him. He was really interested in Renaissance stories, the big stories, the stories of grief, of death and resurrection, and the flagellation. Mm-hmm. And he had changed his name to Guston. So having noticed that, and then you see these Klansmen who are painting, I was also at the same time very interested in Diane Arbus, or I think it's Deanne Arbus.
It is
Deanne Arbus. She lived uptown, so Deanne. I was reading books on her at the same time, very randomly, and what I noticed about these two artists is that they both proposed something that appealed to me a great deal, which was, what would happen if you rather than pointing the finger out into the world and saying, you're bad, you're a bad person, I'm going to make art that's like an agitprop that like shows how good I am and what a good person I am. But instead, you sort of find, like with Arbus, she turns the camera on the dwarf, but she doesn't belittle the dwarf. She is the dwarf. She is part of that. And in reality, as human beings, even though I personally may not carry the gene for dwarfism, I am a human being. We are part, like that is a part of us. We try, what I learned from Arbus is we try to push the other to the edges. But we are the other, no matter what we do. And I found that incredibly exciting, and I thought, what would happen if I pointed the finger, like Guston, he said, I'm the Klansman. I'm a Jew, but I am my own worst enemy. And I'm not going to point the finger at the Klan and say, ooh, they're bad, because earlier in his work, he did. And then here, he is painting and smoking, and it's a self-portrait. And then he later talks about how he lets them loose in the landscape, and there's a quote even where he says, I was interested, now that I had created this cast of characters, letting them loose and imagining them like Isaac Babel, who himself was the Russian writer who joined the Red Army as a Jew undercover and rode around and, with the enemy. And he said, what would that be like to ride around with the enemy, to be up to no good as an artist in the work, in the studio? And I thought, it may not be ideal, but it's honest. It's more honest than trying to, tell somebody else how they should be. So first, look inside and take that. So I questioned that, and I said, well, what if, for Arbus, it was the freaks, so-called freaks, because she came from this now we look at people uptown, we're like, that's pretty freaky. The plastic surgery thing and all that, but she did get into that. But I thought, what if, and with Guston, it was the Klan. And I said, well, for me, what would it be? What if I were to explore misogyny? I mean, I would like to believe I'm not a misogynist, and I do believe there's a special place in hell for women who do not help other women. But, having said that.
It's actually amazing. Yeah, go on, having said that. I'm like, I believe that too.
Being a woman, you believe that too.
Absolutely.
But not like waving my feminist flag thing, like, I'm a good person, look at me, I'm a good person. Well, misogyny exists so powerfully. It's like ridiculous. Like, it's like, do I even have to sell this to anybody? It's like, so what if I were to explore the pieces of it that, because I'm part of society, that are still trapped inside of me, that are, still, I'm stuck with it, just like with Guston or with Arbus. So I decided to go to the place you're not supposed to go.
Exactly. And that's part of why I love your work so much, because it charges the viewer, it charges the beholder with that kind of interaction. You have to really take on that gaze. It's like that triptych where you're literally standing in front of that painting, looking up the dress of the central subject. You have to embody those questions that people like Guston and Deanne Arbus and yourself all are exploring. And we really should talk about Day and Night, which is, to my mind, a masterpiece that you made for the Whitney Biennial. And maybe you can talk about the different kinds of models in your work and how this led to a very specific body of work.
Well, prior to this particular year, I would also say I didn't make it for the Whitney Biennial. I made it, and it was in the Whitney Biennial.
Technicality.
Well, and it was also the Whitney Biennial like 15 years ago. So the work I was doing, I always sort of pushed myself forward by being sick of myself. and being a little bored, and I try to be sensitive to where I'm being bored. And prior to this, everything I had made were invented and had no source material, other than some idea in my mind, and I would sketch something and kind of draw it out in paint. So I began to be interested in what would it mean if I actually started working from a model, and really kind of just, I remember writing in a book, what is a model? And then I gave several different ideas. What is a model? A model is a naked lady or a naked man who stand in a room and pose for you. A model is, like an architectural model, or, something like, a maquette. A model is like a Platonic idea, which I realized I'd already been doing that, in some way, like ideas of things that were in my imagination. So I kind of went, okay, well, what if I explored the maquette idea and the idea of the person, the naked lady in the room idea, because I was interested in playing out the thing, as I had said, the Guston idea. So I had been exploring these old magazine stores, and went into a store and was looking at these, because Guccioni's pictures are so incredibly beautiful, and and it's not my style to use other people's photographs, so I made this particular period super short, because I didn't like touching on other people's work, not to mention not wanting to get sued. And then I was in the magazine store. It's actually a story that I tell Katie Siegel that's in the book here for the show. Some guy said to me as I was going through the racks, excuse me, are you doing research? And I looked at him, I said, I'm doing whatever you're doing.
Amazing.
Because because it's so typical not to want to, of course I was doing research, but maybe he's doing research, So, it was just sort of a funny thing, and he just sort of ran away from me. But I didn't want to foreclose imaginatively taking these pictures back to my studio that I was being this feminist doing research, which is what he was basically calling me out on. And I wanted to be like, this dirtbag, gathering up my penthouses, I kind of like the persona.
Right.
And I was like, I want to be that guy too.
Right.
I don't want to give up. I don't want to be right.
Right.
I like the idea of painting from the point of being wrong, and that through painting, you materialize it into something worthy. It starts wrong and you bring it up.
Absolutely.
So this didn't last long, and then I actually made little sculptural maquettes. Did I put any of those in the show, or I took them out?
Yeah, they're not the maquettes, but the paintings are from the maquettes.
You can see these on. I have a website, and they're called Bad Habits sculptures, so you can see them on there. They were like, to call them sculptures is kind of a stretch. They're like figurines. I made them out of child's clay. So I explored the idea of making maquettes. So I went in both directions at the same time. Around 97, 99, 2001, I was still working out both of these possibilities of not working just from imagination. And the maquettes were based, they're called Bad Habits, and which is cribbing a title from a Guston painting, because Guston made a painting called Bad Habits and another painting called Smoking, Eating, Painting, or something like that. And I love the idea of a long string of gerunds. So I made mine ass picking, food eating, head shrinking, social climbing motherfuckers. And also, this was also, I constantly throughout my career, I know it doesn't seem like it because I'm sitting here and up on the podium with him, but I had a lot of down period. Galleries kept going out of business or dropping me. And I had a lot of periods where I didn't have any audience besides, other artist friends I'd gone to school with, and kept having, I kept thinking, now it's going to work. And then it was like, didn't work in terms of I'll be able to just paint. So the constant times when I got sent back to no audience, working in my studio, just believing that I was right, that it was not the work that was the issue, maybe it was the economy. It's like, isn't that somebody said, it's the economy, stupid? The 90s were difficult times, and then at some point, things changed. And I basically, every time I had no audience, I would go back to my studio and just say, what do you really, 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 really want to do? Like, just do it. Like, make something crazy. And, I think those are good opportunities to go crazy. So the maquettes are represented not here physically, but there's a triptych called, can you put the
triptych?
The triptych with the
Motherfucking
food eating
wrong.
hard place? Food eating hard place. Anyway, just there are 2 paintings here that are painted from the Bad Habits sculptures. And maybe you took them out?
No, they're here.
There.
They're there.
Yeah. So this one is literally painted from one of the sculptures. I mean, the color was not, the sculptures were white, but I would put the sculptures in sun and study the light. And I remember when I was painting them, I was like, is this a still life painting? Because it's like this object, or is this a figure painting? And I kind of liked how weird that was. And I did that for a few years, and then I needed to move on again. I was like, okay, back to the drawing board. So I worked from an old friend. Then I got an old friend, Kathy, which is represented here in Shrugs, to come and model for me. And she was the first time I actually used a live model and I actually took pictures of myself because she's a mom and had little kids. So I would have rather painted her, but she didn't have the time to stick around. So I had another girl come and pose with her, mostly because I thought in case she couldn't show up. And it turned out really interesting, the dynamic between the 2 of them. They were strangers. And it was really interesting to work because Kathy really was the person I had in my mind, always like, she's the blonde, like when I was a kid, like she was the blonde. And, so I love the idea that, again, going back to like the materiality of paint, she was like my fat or my felt. She was real material. It wasn't like, I'm just going to call up the model registry. It had to be her.
That's kind of everything. If materials carry meaning, then this human subject, the
You're
body.
really into materials, too.
I'm a material guy. But in the last few minutes before we open it up to the audience, I think we could talk forever. I really wanted to talk about the new painting you.
And I'm getting an airplane soon.
It's true. We have the clock going. I really want to get to the new painting that you made for us at CAM.
There it is.
There
Whoop.
it is. Oh, hang on a sec.
Just double click on that.
Is this one? How'd we do? But then we need.
What's
yeah.
up?
Yeah, but we need the slideshow. Oh, hold on. We'll get there.
Stay calm.
No
Now
one
you just get
up
to go through and
and see where we were going if we had
everything
2
you
hours.
missed. Everything you missed. Blah. You can see the show. That's the cool part. I don't often do these talks when you can walk around the corner and see the work.
So this new painting that you made for us, the big pileup, I think is an absolute transformation. You should really see the painting.
God,
I know.
Why is it so bright?
Well, we have a lobby with huge
Which
windows,
is great for art,
which is
but not so good
which
for
is
this.
gorgeous for art, but not for a PowerPoint
We should turn
at
it
11
this
a.m.
way next time.
There's many really interesting things that I think you're doing in this painting, specifically about the transformation of matter, and specifically about how that central subject feels as though she is just completely transforming from the material world to the ethereal world. And you've also talked about how in paintings with several subjects, it is quite possible that they could be a fractured psyche, that this painting that looks like it has 20 people in it could be multiple aspects of the same person. So I thought when we close, you can kind of think through what does the symbiotic portrait mean here in this newest painting? Well,
first of all, the important thing is that it is not the fractured self. It's the opposite of the fractured self. In multiplicity, which is it's also part of psychoanalytic thinking, is the idea that within each of us, rather than just the simplistic triad, id, ego, superego, we have endless and multiple selves that we present, which is part of transference. Like, who I am with you is different than who I am with my parents, you know? Like, you know, it's just different. And so these multiple characters that you can, that what other people bring out in you is also only that which can be brought out. So the idea that we can have so many, you know, the sexual self, the studious self, the, you know, endless selves, you know, the murderer, as I said, you know, in each of us, like, you know, it's just, I find it really interesting that, like, you see someone who does something so horrific, so horrific, and just the possibility that that actually is part of us because we are a human, that it's not like, oh, it's over there, that it's possible that under the wrongest and rightest of circumstances you could be that person is really important to me, to not deny that and hope to God that does not ever happen to you, but to possibly open that door that, you know, there's many selves. And, you know, that we're all both male and female because we have mothers and fathers and we have many selves because of all of these different aspects. You know, you meet children who are like 100 years old and you meet 100-year-olds that are 2. You know, it's like, so the age, everything is very much in flux. And so the painting is really so much about, and also the reason why I said it's not the fractured self, because the idea of multiplicity as a fractured self is more like the split personality, where the selves don't even know that they're there, you know, like Sybil. Like, I'm not talking about Sybil,
Right.
which was such an awesome movie.
That's exactly why I was laughing.
No, but that is not what I'm talking about.
Right.
That is when someone's ill, it is fractured. The idea being that all of these parts are in conversation.
Yes.
And so this was an extreme version of a painting where there's just endless selves emerging and endlessly emerging. And I would say there's probably, you know, 100,000, like there's a chorus. And also I was interested in how color can, you know, there's obviously a sculptural grouping in some way, the way this feels, but it takes place in a way that only painting can take place because the weight of the top of this painting and what's supporting it does not make sense sculpturally because the bottom is so light and the top is so heavy. And, you know, that the fact that the whole composition is balancing on that fecund belly that is, I purposely painted as a kind of iridescent thing, is about to pop. So I love this thing where it's still, but it's in motion, and something's about to happen. You know, not like we can blow stuff up over here because this painting is going to stay like this. It doesn't change. You know, paintings don't change. So, anyway, that we can open it up to.
Yeah, I think that context is really important.
Open it up to the smarter people.
Yeah. Let us know what you think. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, we have a question like immediately.
Immediate question.
Uh-oh.
Well, just because I just started oil painting and things, and you're a teacher, I imagine you teach. painting.
Used to,
Oh.
but you know, this is like teaching, so bring it on.
Right. No, when you start a painting, you already have a colored penciled thing before you start, or you just start working on it, or you start the grisaille underpainting first. And
Well, I don't mean to be a
build it.
pain in the ass, but I don't start a painting the same way. I have a few different ways, and one of the things that keeps it fun is that I like to try to figure out new ways to start paintings. But I'll tell you one thing I never do is, and now that I said this, I'm going to go home and think, well, maybe I should do that. I'm a contrarian to myself. So I really don't not on a large painting. I mean, on a small painting, I do, but like on a large painting, I don't just go at it. I prepare to some degree because, you know, I just don't find it fun to flop around. You know, I have a limited amount of energy, and I always, at the end of the day, one of the important things that I do in paintings, generally speaking, and is it's two tricks, important thing. don't leave your brushes in turpentine. I don't understand that. And I actually took a loop. You know what a loop is? It's like to view something like a magnifying thing. On a Philip Guston studio shot to see what was going on his palette table. Like, I was like, give me information on those paintings. And I saw something that I use to this day, which is he had big, giant piles, like enough paint, more than enough paint for that painting. Not like a little smidge, and then you run out, and, oh, I'm gonna get another smidge. This is the way people paint. Think about it. You gotta get your, be like, you don't want somebody to operate and like, I ran out of thread. I'm gonna have to leave them open. It's like that's people you gotta paint as if you're operating, like get prepared. So he had these like piles of color that he pre-mixed, and then he had like 4 or 5 brushes set next to each pile. So he had his like big chunking brush, he had this brush, he had that. So that, in other words, if you're painting with white or pale yellow, or let's say a nice, like a pretty color, and then you want to switch to black, I've seen people banging their head against the wall of, I'm gonna take the black brush and I don't understand why I'm getting green. And they do it every day. And you're like, well, you're just being thick. I don't mean you, I'm just saying, that's something you have to, back up and look at the process and be prepared. So when I work, that was the other thing, is that when I was a student, like, for some reason, everybody just randomly would take a bucket of turpentine. At the end of the day, you'd drop your brushes in there and then like wipe them off and get going again. And that's fine if you want to make paintings that are gray and also dry looking, because turpentine will make them look dry. But I only use clean brushes, and it's funny because I now have a sweet girl who washes my brushes, and I can tell you, people say, I really want to wash your brushes. I'm like, you really don't want to wash my brushes, because it's like 5 hours. It's like when I'm really painting, there's like hundreds of brushes, because I don't use the same brush again often. It's like I will do something with it. The minute it's gotten dirty, I try not to be too stupid and go back with the dirty brush to go back, unless I want to have something get, mixed together.
Next question.
Up there. We got a question
Okay.
from the angels above.
Hi. Earlier you talked about how you felt that your paintings reflected like your internalized misogyny. How do you think that they reflect internalized misogyny, not just you personally, but like in an
Well, I don't, it's just, in some ways, it's just like the fact that, listen, I'm not a young girl anymore, and if I look back at the young girl that I was, and if I'm like, I'm like, I'm not so pretty, but it's like, if you were to like hose Anna Wintour down, or half of those people, they ain't so pretty. You know what I mean? It's like we put these people as our leaders of like self, like who are we supposed to be? And, it's just like, I think everybody who's young is pretty, pimples and all, it's just like, and it's just like, that's the thing, is it's just heartbreaking when you see people, be kind of hard on themselves because they don't fit a certain standard. And that kind of like brain drain, I called it the brain drain. It's like literally like just just drill a hole in a girl's head, fill her, put a tube in, and just let all of the wonderful intelligence, and like, they talk about kids when they're little girls, they climb in trees, they're like, I can take on the world, and then something happens. And it's just like, because the goodness just drains out and they let it go because they, like, for some reason, like, believe this crap that people like Anna Wintour want you to believe, like you're supposed to wear these clothes. You're fat if you're not a size 0, which is, funny. That's funny. It should be funny. And we it's like, that's only part of it, but, like self-loathing in that sense is an incredible, I mean, if we could just wipe that away as a disease, women would take, a lot more, they would take over. Don't give it up.
In the front.
I would be really interested. I'd really love to hear you talk a little bit about your inspiration for color, and if that sounds vague, I mean, maybe a musical.
Outside of the things we talked about?
Yeah, I mean, for instance, you do a lot of interesting things with.
Green?
Compliments, and some of the palettes are really unusual.
Ask me about a particular painting, if you can think of one, or something you saw out there.
Well, without talking about a specific painting, maybe what I should say is, like a lot. You talked about your models. You talked about the little figurines, and observing the light, the way they hit them. You do a lot of landscape painting. Also, you talked about the magazine, right? You used some information from that. But it seems to me, there's a musicality, there's a sort of buzz or a groove that you find in color that's really fascinating. Obviously, you've done a lot of color theory, and so you have some.
I just really, when I was young, I took like painting classes and talk about color, and I just feel like maybe, sometimes I think, in my last life, I was, like one of Itten's students, because I just totally got it. I was like, yeah, I get it, and color extension, and it's not that hard to understand, but every time I read it, I understand something new. You cannot know enough about color. It's just, and it's also because it's all relational. One of the cool things, I love asking this question. It's like, and I'll say, it's a trick question. Is yellow, this is for you, okay? Don't anybody else answer. Is yellow warm or cool?
It totally depends.
Yeah, it depends, but that is a really big deal. The whole it depends. So, if you take an unexpected color, or a color, and do an unexpected thing with it, say, make a color sit in a place where it's not supposed to sit, and then create the world around that. That's how you begin to do something.
That kind of answers my question. In other words, maybe you start with a couple things with a given, and then your mind sort of.
Yeah, and I get a lot from reading. I have a little section in my library, and I'm not snobby. Like I have the book on, color decorating ideas throughout the centuries, and there's like a picture of Princess Diana, and it's called To the Manor Born, and I'm like, I don't even understand what this is trying to tell me, but it was like something about Kelly green and plaid and red, and I'm still looking at that and going, is there anything there for me? I can't crack that one, but it's like, I look at these things all the time, because I'm like, looking, but what I believe is whatever I finally get is really like a lot, and it's worth pursuing. The idea of monochrome, can take you a long way, as in the painting Bonfire. Somebody over here.
I think we have one right here. He's raising.
Sorry. Yeah, you're mentioning monochrome. I think your use of color is fabulous. I'm curious about the use of green. You use it quite a bit, or the polarization of green-red, that dichotomy. But, it's such a difficult color to work with. You just seem to really go after it. Can you talk about the use of green?
You can't believe how hard it is to wash brushes after green. And my dad here, he remembers I was using phthalo green when I was a student, and I used to take the paintings, they were so patient with me, take the giant paintings out of the house, and just the teeniest speck of phthalo green in his carpet, and he'd say, what the hell is that green? Because you start wiping it, and it's like everywhere. I say, oh yeah, Dad, because that's a dye. He goes, can you stop using that one? It's like, not possible. Not possible. But, any color can do anything. Any color can be converted to warm, cool, and everything in between, light, dark, everything in between. It's just the range of what color can be is infinite. And, I can stare. I actually have the Itten book on an easel, and I just open it to a page and just stare at it. And I would say, just, talk to me, Johannes. And he'll have his color chart, and it's like the black to white thing, and then each of the colors going down. It's just I don't know. I looked at that, and the idea for hippies. I don't know if you know that painting. I made it for the show with David Warner. It's the one that didn't end up in the show, and this, which looks amazing right now there. But you can look it up. It's called Hippies. And the idea for that came out of staring at this chart. I was like, talk to me, Johannes. And, I ended up painting this painting. He spoke. And so I personified this thing that I saw as a chart.
Hi. You always, as a student, liked Bonnard a lot. And then now I'm wondering, what is the relationship between Baroque painting, Tiepolo, and so forth in your work?
Well, I think it's, stuff that, I don't think of myself, obviously in their league by any chance. I've looked at those paintings in person. But in terms of taking liberties with the body and making things, and sort of not, like a lot of times it's like, if a foot or a leg just doesn't fit, I'll just take it out. And, that kind of thing I think is also, called mannerism. That has a negative connotation. But, the sort of fecundity that's in, those kinds of painters is probably part of what the vibe that you get from this, just the idea of a kind of a, they're not classical paintings, they're not dry. They're not about dryness or about dry subjects. They're kind of juicier subjects and juicier compositions.
Next question. And we really only have time for probably one or two more if you're quick, because you have to get on that plane. Go ahead.
Unless somebody wants to drive me back to the city. How long does it take to drive?
17 hours.
Okay, that's not going to happen.
Yes, ma'am. You've spoken a lot about cultural misogyny within your work. And I'm wondering, is the omission of the male form throughout the majority of your work just kind of a reflection of your disinterest in males, or is it more of a misandrist move?
Well, I think that you didn't see my last show. I'm looking for models. Are you volunteering? Okay, we'll have a casting call, I'll let you know. I've been asked the question, when are you going to paint a man, for a long time, and I've answered the question depending on my mood differently. Sometimes defensively, sometimes rather, kind of, cerebrally, and then other times I just said, well, when one inhabits my imagination. And there's a painting I made at some point, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, where this dude showed up in the background, and he actually was, when I looked at him, I didn't mean for him to show up. He looked like a tourist, and he looked like he was lost. And I thought it was funny. I said, my God, this guy entered my painting, and he's like, what the hell am I doing here? And weirdly, I thought that's how they get in. They got lost, and now I have to, I think the painting's called Tourist. And he's got a glint in his glasses. He's like, where the hell am I? I'm in Lisa Land. Oh, shit. How do I get out of here? And so there have been a lot of male figures in the back of I would call them secondary characters. And recently, I brought them to the fore and had also in the show, we have one of the paintings where there's a couple. In the show, I painted a dude, several dudes. I called them dudes. Dude looks like Jesus, and then Mardi Gras honeymoon, and Dude of Sorrows. You can look them up. And I didn't want to do, see, I'm not about following the rules, if you've been listening. So many of times as a younger painter, when people said, when are you going to paint a man? And another time I would say, well, why are you asking the question? Like, what's bugging you about the fact that I'm not? I mean, I think the real question is, when am I going to paint something else besides a female? Like, why don't I paint, a banana, or a pineapple, or grapefruit? It's like there's a lot of things to paint, but what really made me dig my heels in for a while was I knew that this really ridiculous kind of gendered way of looking at not just art but my art, which is really not about freedom, was, oh, men have painted women for centuries. You're a girl, so you should paint them, get back at them. Like, it's like this swap. And I was like, I'm free to do whatever the hell I want. Why should I not do that just because, why do I have to like do something? That's the thing, it's like, I want to do this. And I'm also willing to have someone not like that I'm doing it, I don't care. I just had to go teach watercolor at NYU in order to pay for my paint, as opposed to have anybody want to be, party to it. But at some point, these dudes started to show up, and I invited them in, and I started to let them come. And I mean, this painting that I made called Dude of Sorrows, that's, like I said, you have to look it up because these are not showing up. But, he's so full of emotion and heartbreak, and I just love him. And, he's a fully fledged character. And, that was just 2 years ago that began. So, I don't do anything that doesn't feel right. I don't do anything I'm supposed to do. I do what I want to do. And I advise artists to do that, because basically your mistakes are the only thing you can call your own.
Last question. Now all the hands come up. Alex, pick one.
I think that's a good transition into what I want to ask. Your earlier work is really focused on like the individual, and as it moved on, these landscapes start coming, and they're almost their own worlds, and they're really one and the same with the figures. And I want to kind of know more about what led you to that.
Well, I began to, once again, thinking about both things, like getting a little sick of myself and, thinking what's next. And often I'll just ask the question, like, okay, like, so what's next? How do you break through this? How do you get out of this thing that you've sort of got yourself stuck in? And I found the answer when I was rereading a quote by Guston. There's a great book of Guston lectures and quotes. And for me, like, I can pretty much just open that like the Bible, put my finger down and find something inspirational. And he said at one point, I created the cast of characters, and now I can set them loose in these landscapes. It's like being a director, and I create mise en scène. And I thought, mise en scène, what would happen if I pulled the camera back, way back? What would it look like? And actually, this painting where the man wandered in off the landscape, when the camera came way back, some guy ended up in the painting, and it's like, so process is actually something we didn't talk about, but the process of how to move forward and how to, excite yourself as an artist and sort of keep things fresh and keep things going. I think that, some of the things we touched on is doing a lot of reading of people who inspire you, even if they're not, artists like you, or even if they're not painters or whatever. It's like, just following intuition and just, being willing to find yourself in a dead end and then try to find a way around it, and all of that.
Well, let's thank Lisa for coming and for this incredible exhibition. I mean, it's a huge crowd.